Hi, this is attorney Adam Sherwin of the Sherwin Law Firm. My law firm address is www.sherwinlawfirm.com. I'm a Massachusetts landlord tenant attorney, and I want to speak to you a little bit today about the rights of a landlord to inspect a tenant's apartment, specifically whether a landlord has such a right to inspect a tenant's apartment. Because a lawyer is doing this presentation, you know there's going to be a disclaimer. The disclaimer is that this is for informational purposes only. It's not legal advice, and you should speak to an attorney before making any legal decisions on your case. A landlord does have a right to enter an apartment for the purpose of doing an inspection. The landlord has this right as the owner of a property to inspect it, to check on how the condition of the property, and in general just see how the premises is being used. There are limits on this in the sense that the landlord has to give reasonable notice. Reasonable notice isn't defined in the law or in case law. As a rule, I always recommend that landlords give their tenants at least a full day's worth of notice. Most importantly, you should do this in writing. Send an email, send a letter. If you're comfortable using text message, a text message is fine, but you want to give some sort of notice in writing. It's also a good idea to try to do an inspection of the apartment when the tenant is actually in the apartment. Reason being is that if the tenant is less than honest, if you enter the apartment and the tenant isn't there, the tenant could claim that something happened or something's missing, and could blame you, potentially setting up a he said, she said situation. So to be on the safe side, try to be in a situation where you have a tenant present, or in the alternative, have a witness with you, have someone who can verify that you did an inspection and did nothing else or took nothing from the property. Reasonable limits do exist on a landlord's right to inspect an apartment, and this is where really common sense would come into play. A landlord, for example, almost certainly couldn't inspect an apartment in the middle of the night when the tenants are almost certainly sleeping, unless the landlord had a really good reason for doing so. So the inspection should happen at a reasonable time, with, of course, reasonable notice. A landlord, in my opinion, under my interpretation of the law, does have a right to designate the right of inspection to someone else. So a landlord could say that their real estate broker, their attorney, maybe a family member has a right to inspect the apartment on their behalf. But that does come with limits. I would argue, if I were representing a tenant on that simply allowing any average Joe to do the inspection would be unreasonable. So that's an area that's something to keep in mind for both landlords and tenants on this matter. And finally, I would say that while the landlord does have a right to inspect the apartment, if such inspections are being done too often, just on a frequent basis, the tenant would have grounds for saying that this is a form of harassment. The landlord certainly has a right to inspect the apartment, but if it's done just too often or done without really any justification at all, that would bridge into the area of harassment. And that's something to consider for both sides. As always, if you have an issue with this, certainly contact a landlord-tenant attorney. If you're either a landlord seeking to inspect an apartment, or if you're a tenant who's having a problem with the landlord. I always recommend that landlords and tenants try to work their problems out together by just talking and trying to find some sort of meeting point between the two. But if that doesn't happen, certainly reach out to a landlord or tenant attorney. This again has been a presentation by Adam Sherwin of the Sherwin Law Firm. My website address is www.sherwinlawfirm.com. You can find on my website landlord tenant resources, different articles I've written about different topics, as well as other video presentations I've done. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you